Howdy, it's the Stick Figure Historian, and this is episode 47 of the American series. Last time, we left the Texans camped along the Buffalo Bayou River, facing off with the Mexicans in San Jacinto Bay. Originally, the Texans had outnumbered the Mexicans by at least 100 men, and there had been some pretty awesome skirmishes and stunt pulling. But when night came, General Martin Perfecto de Caz showed up with a boatload more troops for Santa Anna. However, even though General Martin's reinforcements greatly swelled the numbers of the Mexican army, they did not greatly contribute to its strength. You see, in order to reach Santa Anna in time, Martin was forced to press the soldiers very hard. They had marched non-stop for a full 24 hours to get to their dictator's camp in San Jacinto Bay, and with neither food nor water along the way. This inhumane treatment left them in a pretty sorry condition, you might imagine. Sure, they had come to the battlefield, but there was no energy left with which to battle. The sun rose. April 21st, 1836. The Texans watched from their newly created breastworks just inside the tree line, and the Mexicans watched from their camp in the bay. Neither side made any move towards battle. The hours dragged by. At last, Santa Anna finally allowed the weary troops to eat and catch some desperately needed rest. It almost seemed as if there wasn't going to be a fight at all that day. Sam Houston looked warily towards Vince's Bridge, spanning the Buffalo Bayou River just to the northwest. This was Santa Anna's main connection with the outside world. If more reinforcements were to come over it. But Houston wasn't going to let that happen. The bridge must be destroyed. Late that afternoon, a band of Texans crept through the tall grass, dragging a small cannon behind them. At about 4:30, the Mexicans were still lounging around their camp. Some of them were eating, some were sleeping, and some were even taking the opportunity to bathe. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. A cannon going off in the distance. The demise of Vince's Bridge had just commenced. As the Mexicans were wondering at this sudden outburst, a volley of musket fire came pouring from the tree line where the Texans lay. Then, all at once, scores of men leapt out and started charging with their bayonets leveled.
Charge!
There was going to be a battle after all. Santa Anna and his officers were completely caught off guard, and were immediately thrown into a state of alarm. They ran about shouting orders, trying desperately to form their men up into some kind of fighting order. But with more than 3 different commanders shouting more than 3 different orders, it was only creating more panic than bringing organization to the chaos. It was too late. In less than 20 minutes, the entire Mexican camp had been vacated, the troops scattering in all different directions. Most of them made for the lake just behind them, and others tried their luck in the west, thinking that they might escape by Vince's Bridge. Of course, they didn't know yet that it had been blown up. Even the marshes seemed welcoming, so long as they were a refuge from the rage of the Texans. And truly, it was a rage. An awful, bloody rage. The Battle of San Jacinto was more of a massacre than a battle. Hundreds of Mexicans met their end that day, while the Texans only lost 11 amongst themselves. Most of these Mexicans had no hand in either the Alamo or the Goliad massacre. But the Texans didn't care. In the name of revenge and justice, they themselves had become the villains of the hour. Oh, yeah, but I forgot. The story goes that Houston supposedly tried to stop his men from slaughtering the Mexicans, but they didn't listen. Honestly, I think that's kind of like saying the guy tried to stop the 20-ton boulder that he pushed down the hill. Somehow he doesn't get the credit for working everybody up into a fury with the speech about the Alamo and Goliad before this? Yeah, I'm not buying it, buddy. The victory didn't stir Houston quite as much as it did his men. They had won, it was true. But this was still only part of the great army that had invaded their land. Uriah and his men still lurked out there somewhere. Victory came with a bit of a personal price, too, for the Texan commander. He had taken a ball in the ankle, which was causing him considerable pain. Night was falling now, and the scene of slaughter was winding down as Houston rode about camp, trying to keep the weight off his ailing foot. Suddenly, a band of several hundred shadowy figures emerged from the trees. Houston flew into a panic. "It's the enemy!" he cried. "All is lost!" But in the dimness of the twilight, Houston had failed to notice that these men didn't have weapons. No, these were only the Mexicans that the Texans had taken prisoner. They had been corralled together and were being marched before the general. Houston's relief must have been immense. But what of Santa Anna? Was he among the captured, or did he lie among the fallen in the field? Well, neither as of this evening. During the battle, he had fled. His army was gone. His power was gone. He was forced to fend for himself. He galloped away with those who made for Vince's bridge, only to discover the wreck of it. The marsh became his only refuge then, and there he slept all that night, the dictator who had descended to the swamp. He couldn't hide forever, though. The following day, a band of Texan scouts discovered him crouching in a stand of tall grass. At first, they took him for some common officer, for he wouldn't reveal his true name to them. But when he was led away into the Texan camp, some of the Mexicans saw him and hailed their general in respect. "Viva Santa Anna!" they cried. The Texans looked back at him in shock, and Santa Anna's heart began to sink. Surely his doom was near, for he knew the rage which these people harbored against him. Angry looks and shouts followed Santa Anna all the way through the camp, until at last he stood before the Texan general himself. Houston lay on a blanket spread in the shade of one of the trees, resting his shattered ankle. He and the Mexican dictator looked each other straight in the eye. Houston held this man's life in his hand. He had only to say a word, and his men would gladly make short work of him. And yet, he did not. Why is a mystery. Perhaps it is due to clemency and decency on Houston's part, but there are other possible reasons. One legend states that Santa Anna made a symbol with his hand to Houston, showing that he was a member of the Freemasons. Because Houston himself also belonged to that order, Santa Anna would be appealing to the bond of brotherhood between them. It is possible, but as I said, no one is quite sure of it. In any case, Houston gave strict orders that none should touch the Mexican general without serious repercussions from him. He himself saw that Santa Anna was carefully protected from harm, and had a tent pitched for him right next to his own. Then began the paperwork and negotiations that always follow a major battle. Santa Anna's first step, as part of trying to ensure his personal safety and release, was to pen a letter to his second-in-command, General Filisola. "Yesterday evening we had an unfortunate encounter," he wrote. "Retreat back to Bexar until I send further orders." So, just a note here, to give you an idea of the significance of what we just covered. San Jacinto is the last battle of the Texan War for Independence. After this, Texas would become an independent republic. But of course, at the time all this was going on, the Texans couldn't know that for sure. And we can clearly see that in Sam Houston's miniature panic attack right after the battle, when he saw the shadowy figures approaching and thought they were Uriah's guys. It's easy for us to look back at history and pick out all these particular turning points and battles, but it's important for us to remember that at the time, most people probably didn't even realize what was going on. They were living the story, and they had no idea what was going to happen next. Anyhow, in our next episode, we'll be talking about the last few steps towards Texas becoming completely independent. Thank y'all for watching.